we're going to talk about is two arguments for the existence of God. And I don't just say arguments. I say this is proof for the existence of God. So, but we have to understand the background behind this. Why is this important? Well, the very first question we have to ask ourselves is, does God exist? Because that's the real meaning behind a lot of questions. Does God exist? So Christianity is only true if God exists. Christianity doesn't make any sense. It's basically a fallacy if God doesn't exist. So the secularists rejection starts with God, because the secular naturalist says God doesn't exist. So what we're going to look at is, well, how did everything come about? The first cause. The first cause is a term that's used in replace of God, because without defining God, we just say the first cause. So later on, we're going to talk about who is that first cause. But first, we need to find out, is there a first cause? And this first cause is intelligent, and it's supernatural. And what do I mean supernatural? We live in a natural realm. So things are taking place, rain takes place. You're going to say, oh, how does the rain, get here? It's just natural. It's happening all the time. So that's the natural. Supernatural is beyond the natural realm. So the first cause, because the first cause is outside of being, it's supernatural and intelligent. So this is the first thing we need to ask ourselves. What is the cause of being? Everybody here, you're here. That's a given. So how do we get here? What's our cause? What's the cause of the universe? What's the cause of life? What's the cause of existence? So God either exists or God does not exist. So if God does not exist, you still have to explain the cause. Regardless of someone saying, I'm an atheist, I don't believe in God, you still have to explain, well, how did you get here? How did the universe get here? How did life change? How did all these things occur? And that's an important thing to remember when talking to someone along these lines. So what was the cause of life from the very first cell to us? So this is known as the cosmological argument. And what is a cosmological argument? Cosmological argument is that everything comes to be must have a cause. So for example, you're sitting in a chair. Well, how did that chair get there? Who designed the chair? How did the materials appear? All of that is from a cause. You can keep going backwards and backwards. So, and the way I like to illustrate this best, if I had a candle, I would light my candle, okay? And that candle that's burning is finite. That means there's a limited amount of energy that the candle's going to dissipate. But what does that mean? It's finite means it has a cause. Someone made the candle, and that candle has energy in it, and that energy is being dissipated. That's finite. Well, what other candles can we look at? Let's look at the biggest candle that's closest to us is the sun. The sun is basically a candle. It's dissipating energy, a finite amount of energy it has. So what does that mean? It means it had a cause. Someone or something or some way that sun came about, and there was a start to it before it was turned on. Well, let's keep going back. So we have a sun. So every star that you see, unless it's a galaxy or asteroid, but mostly our stars are suns, just like our sun. They're bigger, smaller, different types and varieties of suns. They also have to have a cause because they're finite. Then we keep going back. Well, our sun and all the stars are in a galaxy. Well, we know that there's other galaxies and that are composed of suns and stars, okay? So, but that's the same issue. They had to have a start. So we keep going back, okay, to a universe. Well, when was the start of the universe? Because energy is being dissipated. So when did the universe start? So we know now, and we're going to get into this. We know because this was the big debate. The big debate is, do we live in a static universe where everything has always been that is, or did the universe that we live in have a start? Well, biblically speaking, Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That's the debate. Well, this atheist will say, no, God didn't create the heavens and the earth. So like Einstein, for example, believed in a static universe at first, okay? But science has proven that that our universe is expanding. So the reason if we have an expanding universe, what does that mean? You have a starting point. It's like expanding from what? Expanding from a starting point. And so we have the evidence that we have an expanding universe. We have the evidence that we have a universe that started, and that we're going to get into these different evidences. This is kind of the argument we're getting into. So either if God does not exist, we still have to explain where the universe came from. So so there's two options. Either the universe came from nothing, or the universe had no cause, it always existed, and then we have to explain life. Life is the next thing. So how did life come about? What was the cause of life? Was it random event that with no outside intelligence, because there's no God, therefore no outside intelligence. You can't say Mother Nature, because then you're attributing an intelligence to Mother Nature. So there's no outside intelligence. Or does God exist? So if God exists, God is the first cause who created the universe, and he organized the universe. And then how did life come about? Well, God caused life, the first life, and God created and designed all life. So this is kind of like the two roads that everybody has to go to. And there's people who are, I don't care, I don't know, I'm just here. Where's the McDonald's at? Okay. I mean, I'm serious. There are, some people never think about it until they die, and they say, oh, maybe I should have thought about it. So we want to examine what the cosmological argument is. So the cosmological argument is that first we start out with this question: how did we get here? You're here. No one can argue with that point. If you can hear that question, it means you're here. But the question is, how did we get here? So if we have the question of how did we get here, a corollary to that question, how do we get here, is where are you going? Because if you're just an accident and you got here by accident, then you're not going anywhere, okay? So these are what's called first principles. Now, so I can look and say, well, I know my mom, and I have pictures of my mom's mom. I know my mom's mom, and I have pictures of my mom's mom, okay? And I have pictures of my mom's father's family, so it can keep going back in time. I can read about history. So eventually, we have what's called a family tree. So we know everybody here is related to people who lived before you, and who lived before you, who lived before you. Eventually, you get down to the first persons, okay? We're all here related. So we ask the question, what's the cause of our existence? And what's the cause of the universe? And this gets to what's called the principle of causality, okay? So, but think about this. What caused the car that you drive? What caused the house that you live in? What caused the world, and what caused the sun, and what caused the universe? So all these are causes. Every single one of these things you can keep going back. You keep breaking down into smaller and smaller parts, but you have to get to the point of what's called the cosmological. So we know we exist. We don't have to argue that. So the cause to our existence is what we're talking about. The cause, if we can find the cause to the universe, we can find the cause to our existence, and this is known as the principle of causality. So the principle of causality is this, and this is in your handout. Only being can cause being. Nothing does not exist, and only what exists can cause existence, since the concept of cause implies an existing thing that has the power to affect another. From absolutely nothing comes absolutely nothing. Nothing is nothing. It's like things aren't appearing out of something out of nothing. So what cause? So this is the argument. So when we think about it, we keep going back. We keep going back unto the first cause, to the beginning. So how do we know what that beginning is? What kind of evidence do we have? That's what we want to examine. Let me stop there and see if anybody has any questions. The question that we have, whether you're a believer or a non-believer, is what caused the universe and what caused life. So you have two options. If you're a non-believer, you have an option. You say, well, I don't believe in God, but you still have to explain how the universe came about. And you still have to explain how life came about. So if you're a non-believer, if you're atheist, and if you're agnostic, you're saying, I don't know. So we're not talking about agnostics, okay? But if you're an atheist who says God did not cause, well, how did it come about? You have to explain it. You don't have a pass. Because you say, I'm an atheist, I don't believe in God, doesn't mean you have a pass, so I don't have to answer that question. Yes, you do. Because you still have to call, you still have to, it's a logical question. So that's where we're going. So everything has a cause. A candle has limited energy, the sun is finite, so therefore, so this is kind of gets into this point. Now, Sir Francis Bacon, he's considered the grandfather of modern science. And his statement is, true knowledge is knowledge by causes. So you think about true knowledge. So what is science? True science is knowledge by causes. So like how does the light work? How does light work? How does gravity work? So you're asking the cause. How does the universe work? Where did it all come about? And so this is just pure logic here. David Hume, who's agnostic or atheist, says, I never asserted to so absurd a proposition as that anything might arise without a cause. So we're just basically taking the shovel and we're digging down till we get to the hard rock. And the hard rock is the question of what is the cause? What's the cause? Is everybody with me? Does anybody have any questions? So what's known as the singularity is also known as the Big Bang. And again, we're not getting into the Bible yet. We're just talking from the scientific, secular perspective in the world, okay? That the singularity is the euphemism for the Big Bang, that there was a time in which matter and existence exploded into existence. Now, what we're talking about is what is the cause of that? There was a time when science taught that the universe was static or just a common, like it's always been, it's always like continuing. But the latest science has revealed that our universe actually had a starting point, and that became known euphemistically as the Big Bang or its singularity, in which it starts. So the question is, what is the cause of this? So here's the corollaries. A finite universe requires a cause because it has a starting point. So it's a finite universe, has a starting point, requires a cause. So if the universe had a beginning, it needs a first cause. And then, did the universe self-cause itself? Now you might say that's kind of ridiculous, self-causing itself, okay? But we're going to talk about that. The naturalist position. Who's the naturalist? The naturalist believes in the material, like it's a non-theist viewpoint, that there is no God. And so the naturalist says there's no God, and therefore you have two options, okay? That the universe came from nothing, or it always existed. Those are your only two options if you don't believe in God. You have to believe that, because we're here, and we got here somehow, and if there's no God, therefore you have to believe it always existed, or it came from nothing. So those are, and then someone will say, well, there's a multiverse. Well, even still, you have to explain the cause of the multiverse. I mean, it does. Yeah. Well, no. I'm just talking secular science here. Secular science. So in the principle of causality, only being can cause being, and nothing does not exist, and only what exists can cause existence. So this is where we're going. So now, this is Lawrence Krauss. He was a professor at Case Western, and later a professor at Arizona State University. This is what he says: a universe from nothing. He actually believes, because he's an atheist, so he still has to explain how the universe came into existence. So he actually wrote a book postulating using quantum mechanics, which is kind of, he's just placing language to create a universe out of nothing, because nothing means absolutely nothing. You're not going to get energy that's going to create a universe from nothing spontaneously into existence. But because he's an atheist, he can't go into the route of looking at God as the option. So he's staying with a universe from nothing. So that's his only postulation, and that's what most atheists have not necessarily thought through the process. They just say, I don't believe in God. But if you ask the question to an atheist, well, then where do you believe the universe came from? They'll say, I don't know. For example, Neil deGrasse Tyson. Thank you. So Neil deGrasse Tyson, actually, they asked him the question, well, where did the universe come from? Well, we don't know. But you know that God doesn't exist, but you don't know what the cause of the universe is, okay? So we're gonna get more into that. So to have faith, it was caused by a supernatural first cause, or do you have faith that it was caused by nothing? These are, again, the two options. So here's the evidence for the existence of God. So the very first is what's called the first law, which is the law of energy conservation. So the energy of conservation states that energy can neither be created nor destroyed. It's transferred, okay, from a state of low entropy to high entropy. So in the second law is the law of energy decay, and states that in a closed system, the amount of usable energy in the universe is decreasing. So entropy is the level of disorder in a system. So a highly ordered system is in a low state of entropy, and a disordered system is a higher state of entropy. So a great example that's used, okay, is ice. Ice, water, and steam are all the same thing. They're all the same material, H2O. So ice is in a low state of entropy. So as it melts, and the energy is dispersing, and becomes in a higher state of energy, whereas steam is the highest state of energy. It's the highest state of entropy. So, and it's the same for the universe. So when we say the Big Bang, so we have a universe that was ordered, and it's as our star is burning energy, that energy is being dissipated throughout the universe. And it's not the only thing for our star, our sun. It's for all the stars, all the suns. The energy is being dissipated. It's going away. It's like an ice cube that's melting as the energy is being pushed away. And what does that mean? That's going from a state of low entropy to higher entropy. So that entropy is going away. That's important, because that's like showing you that our universe is basically decaying from its energy source. So this is in your handout. A lot of people who are atheists don't necessarily think through the process of what we're talking about. Just because I personally have the opportunity of speaking to lots of people and asking lots of people the question, and it always gets down to these questions. People haven't. Well, I don't know. Just like Neil deGrasse Tyson says when they asked him, well, where did it all come from? He goes, well, we don't know. But you're sure it's not God? Yeah, I'm sure it's not God, but I don't know where it all came from. Okay.
You don't know everything. How do you know you're missing something?
Right, that's the whole point, exactly. And so, and this is where we look at the evidence. This is important to understand the evidence, because a lot of people are atheists not because they've thought through the process, but because they haven't thought through the process. And so that's where we have an opportunity as believers to help people think through that process. So let me read. This is on page 3 of the handout, and this is Roy Peacock. He's an expert in thermodynamics, and in his book, A Brief History of Eternity, he shows how the discoveries, along with the laws of thermodynamics, show the universe is finite. So let me just read the quotes here, but let me just read from the quote. It says, the second law of thermodynamics is probably the most powerful piece of legislation in the physical world. It ultimately describes every process we have ever discovered in the final court of appeal in any dispute relating to the action and procedures, whether they are naturally generated or man-inspired. It draws the conclusion that in our universe, there is an overall reduction in order. a loss of available energy that's measured as an increase in entropy. So the available stock of order is being exhausted, akin to the dying battery of a flashlight. Useful energy is being dissipated into entropy, after which none remains for use. For us to live in a universe in which a second law of thermodynamics holds, then it must be a universe that has a starting point of creation. So that's just science, okay? Science says that our universe is proved, our universe has a starting point. Logic proves our universe has a starting point. But there were, 100 years ago, there was still debate about this issue, okay? There was still debate because people didn't want to believe that the universe had a starting point, because a universe with a starting point has a corollary. The corollary is, well, what caused the universe? And people who were atheistic or materialistic or naturalistic didn't want to believe it had a starting point, because a starting point would mean that there might be a God, okay? So, but science has validated that the universe has a starting point. And one of the validations is what's known as the radiation echo, okay? The radiation echo was Arno Penzance and Robert Wilson. They won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1978 for it. And what they did is they proved that the universe had a beginning. Their data found that radiation was left over from the initial explosion of the beginning of the universe, commonly referred to as the Big Bang. In 1989, a satellite named the COBE, Cosmic Background Explorer, was successfully launched into space with instruments on board capable of measuring the radiation echo left behind from the Big Bang. In 1992, a final summation of COBE's data was made public and hailed as the most unprecedented. And so this is Stephen Hawking. He says, because he's also an atheist, okay? But he says that the Cosmic Background Explorer's validation of Arno Penzance and Robert Wilson's radiation echo, he said it was the most important discovery of the century, if not all time, because it validated the universe had a starting point. So even though it was logically, we could look at it, but now there's no wiggle room. There's no excuse to say the universe didn't have a starting point, because science itself is validating that the universe has a starting point. And let's look at Einstein, because Einstein also had a problem with this, okay? Einstein, the expanding universe confirmed a starting point. So Einstein was disturbed by a starting universe. Einstein was also, quote, an atheist, okay? And so some people would debate whether he was atheist, but like a lot of the atheists are always like kind of like the Star Wars atheist. You know what a Star Wars atheist is? It's an undefined force out there. We don't really know what that force is, can't explain what the force is. Kind of like Neil deGrasse Tyson saying, well, how did the universe come about? Well, we don't know. There's kind of a force out there. We don't know, okay? But when Einstein came to the conclusion that the universe had a starting point, Robert Jastrow was there. He says, around this time, signs of irritation began to appear among the scientists. Einstein was the first to complain. He was disturbed by the idea of a universe that blows up, because it implied that the world had a beginning. In a letter to De Sitter, discovered in a box of old records in Leiden some years ago, Einstein wrote, quote, this circumstance of an expanding universe irritates me. And in another letter about the expanding universe, he said, to admit such possibilities seem senseless. I suppose that the beginning, quote, end of quote, I suppose that the beginning in time annoyed Einstein because of its theological implications. Because it proved, it was evidential that there's a God. So the question is, what caused the universe, okay? So since the universe is finite, it requires a beginning, and the expansion of the universe requires the right amount of energy to create the galaxy. So we know that the universe had a starting point, and let's go with the singularity, that there was a starting point in the universe and it's expanding. But it's not just that simple that you have an expanding universe. All the right principles have to be in place. It has to be expanding at the right rate of speed to escape gravity, but it also has to be expanding fast enough that it can coagulate into galaxies, into universes, into stars, into solar systems, that it's not expanding too fast. So this is what's called the fine-tuning principle. And so in a quote by John Polkinghorne in his book, One World, it says, in the early expansion of the universe, there has to be a close balance between the expansive energy driving things away, so that's what the material is moving away from the starting point, and the force of gravity pulling things together. He goes, and I'll borrow an illustration from Paul Davies of what accuracy means. He points out that it is the same as aiming at a target an inch wide on the other side of the observable universe, 20,000 million light years away, and hitting the mark. And that's just one, the gravitational pull and the expansion at the right setting is just one element of this whole thing. A guy named Fred Hoyle. He was actually an atheist, and before he died, I don't know if he became what's known as a theist, like the force. There's a force. I know, because he was a very staunch, hard atheist, but the evidence overwhelmed him. He said, it's not logical to believe that position. So I don't know who God is, but I know there's a force out there, that an intelligent force. And so, some people call him a Christian, but I don't think he became a Christian. But he's very well known in scientific circles for his discoveries, Fred Hoyle. But this is Robert Jastrow, and he wrote in his book on the subject. He goes, theologians generally are delighted with the proof that the universe had a beginning, but astronomers are curiously upset. Their reactions provide an interesting demonstration of the response of the scientific mind, supposedly a very objective mind. When evidence uncovered by science itself leads to a conflict with articles of faith in our profession, it turns out that the scientist behaves the way the rest of us do when our beliefs are in conflict with the evidence. We become irritated, we pretend that the conflict does not exist, and we paper over it with meaningless phrases. So that's Robert Jastrow. And so that, in essence, is what's called the cosmological argument. For me, it's foolproof demonstration that God exists. So someone says there's no evidence that God exists. I say the cosmological argument by itself proves the existence of God, and which is made up of the fine-tuning, the universe had a starting point, and all the other elements. Let me stop there, see if anybody has any questions.